Welcome to Echoes of Darkness. Today, we delve into the life of Mao Zedong, the leader behind some of China's deadliest policies. Born in 1893 in Shaoshan, Hunan Province, Mao Zedong grew up in a rural farming family. His early years were marked by a rebellious spirit and a thirst for knowledge that went beyond his village. He was deeply influenced by the political turmoil of early 20th century China, witnessing the fall of the Qing dynasty and the rise of competing warlords. This chaotic environment fueled his revolutionary ambitions. As a young man in Changsha, he devoured political and philosophical texts, shaping the ideology that would later define a nation. He became an early member of the Chinese Communist Party, founded in 1921, believing that only a radical transformation could save China from foreign domination and internal decay. His early political activities were a mix of organizing and writing. He spent time in Shanghai and Guangzhou, working with both the Communist Party and the Nationalists, the Kuomintang, in a fragile alliance. Mao's focus on the peasantry as the main force of revolution was a unique take on Marxist theory, which traditionally centered on the urban working class. He believed China's vast rural population held the key to power. This conviction was solidified during his investigations in the countryside, where he saw firsthand the struggles and potential of the farmers. His ideas, however, often put him at odds with the Soviet-backed leadership of his own party. The alliance with the Nationalists eventually shattered, leading to a brutal purge of communists in 1927. Mao and his followers were forced to retreat into the remote mountains of Guangxi province. There, they established a rural base, the Guangxi Soviet. It was here that Mao began to implement his revolutionary theories, conducting land reforms and building up his own military force, the Red Army. He honed his skills in guerrilla warfare, developing tactics that would become legendary. But pressure from the nationalist forces under Chiang Kai-shek was relentless. By 1934, they were surrounded, facing annihilation. This desperate situation triggered the legendary Long March. Over the course of a year, Mao led his followers on a grueling 6,000-mile retreat across some of China's most inhospitable terrain. The march was a brutal test of survival. Of the roughly 86,000 who started, only a few thousand made it to the new base in Yan'an. Yet, this devastating retreat became a powerful founding myth for the Communist Party. During the march, Mao solidified his leadership, outmaneuvering his rivals at the Zuni Conference and becoming the undisputed head of the party. The Long March transformed a military defeat into a symbolic victory, cementing Mao's authority and the resilience of his movement. In Yan'an, Mao had time to further develop his political and military doctrines. He wrote extensively, adapting Marxism-Leninism to Chinese conditions, a philosophy that would come to be known as Mao Zedong thought. When Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China in 1937, the political landscape shifted again. The Communists and Nationalists formed a second, uneasy alliance to fight the common enemy. While the Nationalists bore the brunt of conventional fighting, Mao's forces used guerrilla tactics to expand their influence in the countryside, winning popular support through their discipline and land reform promises. By the end of World War II, the Communist Party was stronger than ever. The war's end immediately gave way to the Chinese Civil War. The final showdown between Mao's communists and Chiang's nationalists began. Despite being initially outnumbered and outgunned, Mao's forces had superior morale, discipline, and widespread support among the peasantry. The nationalist government was plagued by corruption and economic collapse, losing the faith of the people. City by city, the communists advanced. By 1949, they had achieved a decisive victory. Chiang Kai-shek and his followers fled to Taiwan. On October 1, 1949, standing in Tiananmen Square, Mao Zedong proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China, declaring that the Chinese people had stood up. With control of the country, Mao set about radically transforming Chinese society. The early 1950s saw land redistribution, the suppression of counter-revolutionaries, and China's entry into the Korean War. He launched campaigns to improve literacy and public health, but also to enforce ideological conformity. A cult of personality began to form around him, with his image and words becoming ubiquitous. He was the great helmsman, guiding the ship of state toward a communist future. His power was absolute, and his vision was ambitious, aiming to rapidly industrialize China and catch up with the Western world in just a few decades. This ambition culminated in the Great Leap Forward, launched in 1958. It was a disastrous social and economic campaign. People were organized into massive communes, private farming was abolished, and communities were ordered to produce steel in backyard furnaces, melting down tools and household goods. The policy was based on revolutionary zeal rather than sound economics. Agricultural production plummeted as farmers were diverted to futile industrial projects. The focus on exaggerated production targets led officials to lie about harvests, leaving peasants with nothing to eat. The result was one of the deadliest famines in human history. Tens of millions of people starved to death between 1959 and 1962. It was a catastrophe of monumental proportions. The failure of the Great Leap Forward weakened Mao's position within the party. He took a step back from day-to-day governance, allowing more moderate leaders like Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping to take charge and repair the shattered economy. They introduced policies that allowed for a degree of private enterprise, which began to bring the country back from the brink of collapse. But Mao viewed these pragmatic measures as a betrayal of the revolution, a slide back toward capitalism. He grew suspicious of his comrades, believing they were leading China down the capitalist road. He began plotting his return to absolute power. In 1966, Mao launched the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution to reassert his authority and purge his rivals. He mobilized the youth of China, known as the Red Guards, to attack the four olds: old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. What began as a political purge spiraled into a decade of chaos and violence. Schools were closed, ancient temples were destroyed, and intellectuals were persecuted. The Red Guards turned on anyone deemed a class enemy, including their own teachers and parents. Society was torn apart by factional fighting. Liu Shaoqi, the head of state, was publicly denounced, tortured, and died in prison. Millions were persecuted, and the country was plunged into a state of near anarchy. The Cultural Revolution solidified Mao's cult of personality to an extreme degree. His little red book of quotations became a sacred text, and loyalty to Chairman Mao was the ultimate measure of a person's worth. The chaos he had unleashed, however, eventually became too much even for him. By the late 1960s, he had to use the army to restore order and send the Red Guards to the countryside to be re-educated by the peasants. The most intense phase of the revolution was over, but its political and social turmoil continued until his death. The campaign left deep scars on the Chinese psyche and decimated a generation of leaders and intellectuals. In his later years, Mao's health declined. He remained the paramount leader, but was increasingly isolated, his power exercised through a small circle of loyalists, including his wife, Jiang Qing, who led the radical Gang of Four. In a surprising turn, he orchestrated a diplomatic opening to the West, culminating in U.S. President Richard Nixon's historic visit to China in 1972. This move was a strategic play against the Soviet Union, with whom China's relationship had soured dramatically. It reshaped the Cold War landscape but did little to change the internal political climate. Mao Zedong died on September 9, 1976, at the age of 82. His death marked the end of an era. It triggered a power struggle that resulted in the arrest of the Gang of Four and the eventual rise of Deng Xiaoping, a pragmatist whom Mao had purged twice. Deng would go on to initiate the sweeping economic reforms that transformed China into the global powerhouse it is today, effectively dismantling much of Mao's economic legacy while preserving the party's political control. Mao Zedong remains one of the most controversial figures of the 20th century. He is officially revered in China as the founder of the nation, the revolutionary who ended a century of humiliation. Yet, his utopian visions and ruthless political campaigns, like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, led to immense suffering and the deaths of tens of millions of his own people. His legacy is a complex and often contradictory mix of national liberation and totalitarian oppression. A revolutionary leader whose quest for a new China came at an almost unimaginable human cost. Thank you for watching this episode of Echoes of Darkness. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history's most impactful figures. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next video. We'll see you next time.